Okay, Mike, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Marty. And thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Mike Perroni. I'm the Assistant Director of the Northwest Agriculture Business Center, and just delighted to have you all with us today. I'm gonna give a little background on the grant that is funding us to provide services and do things like this. And then I'll introduce our presenter today, Laura Raymond. NABC is currently facilitating a regional food systems partnership grant. It is a relatively large and complex grant with 4 objectives. One, to put together a steering committee to support the development of agricultural infrastructure in our region. The next is to create a network of independent farmer-owned food hubs. The third is specific to food access and creating a replicable model in which regional food hubs serve the food access community. And the fourth is a curriculum of farmer-to-farmer exchange of information. So NABC is here serving as the project manager for the grant. We're leveraging long-standing relationships. We have excellent working relationships with many organizations, entities, and others in Western Washington and beyond. Working with multiple local, state, and federal agencies in terms of grant funding opportunities. We work with other nonprofits and lending institutions. And really, if you don't know NABC, our primary focus is to provide business technical services to agricultural enterprise. What we learned very quickly in helping to facilitate this regional food systems partnership grant is that when you put food and systems together in the same sentence, it is an incredibly broad stakeholder group, an incredibly broad community that you're serving. And so currently, the first objective, which is focused on infrastructure, has developed a context committee. And that committee's focus is to locate the work of the grant team within the larger food systems community, as well as offer information to the larger food systems community. So this Lunch and Learn series was designed to be really informal, interactive, and dynamic. Delighted to have Laura Raymond with us today, and delighted with the opportunity to provide some information for those of you who are attending. Laura, I've had the opportunity to work with Laura for several years in this, and she's a skilled, committed leader in food systems development. She's currently with the Regional Markets Program within WSDA. I'm sure she'll be able to fill you in a little bit more, but I wanted to mention briefly that within that Regional Markets Program, there's the Farm to School program, Small Farm Direct Marketing. There's also Bridging Gaps, which is a service that helps provide gaps training to diversified small farms, the Farm to Cafeteria, and the Regional Markets team is also tasked with the development of local food systems infrastructure. On top of all that, and I'm not sure where Laura finds the time, she is instrumental in a collaboration with the Washington State Conservation Committee in forming the Food Policy Forum, which focuses on policy issues in our state. It was created through a legislative budget proviso in 2016, and they create meaningful recommendations on a policy level to improve Washington's food system. So we have before us an incredible individual. I'm looking forward to hearing what Laura has to say and having her describe some of the opportunities that WSDA currently has for development of food systems in Western Washington and beyond. Laura, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mike. And thanks everybody for taking your lunchtime to share this hour with and inviting me to be here with you to hopefully have a little bit of a conversation. So as Mike and Marty both mentioned, I'm Laura Raymond. I work for the Washington State Department of Agriculture, where I lead the Regional Markets Program. And my intention today is to just walk you through a little bit of an introduction, honestly, to WSDA in particular and to the Regional Markets Program in particular. And then, as Mike said, to talk a little bit, so that will take you through sort of what we do normally, what we've been doing during the last 2 years of the pandemic, when I think all of us have found ourselves doing things that are slightly different than what we've been used to. And then talk to you a little bit about what we see on the horizon. And that's where the conversation around some of the opportunities can happen. And I have some questions for all of you that I hope will help inform some of how we carry out our work at regional markets, and also just to have a broader conversation around things that are on your minds relating to local food systems and support for local food systems in Washington. So with that, just a quick intro. You know, what does WSDA do? We provide services, we regulate, and we do some advocacy. Focusing, so we are a regulatory agency, and so we do inspections for consumer protection. We support producers with all types of support for production, and we do marketing work to promote Washington's products, both within our own state, hyper-locally, and internationally. We have around 750 employees around the state, full-time, and they do all kinds of different things. We have entomologists who work on both beneficial and invasive species work. We have investigators, we have food safety experts, marketing analysts, et cetera, and then we also have many staff who join us on a seasonal basis to do inspections, primarily crop inspections. You know, the offices are headquartered in Olympia, but we actually have regional offices around the state, and we have smaller offices or individual staff members in every single county across the state. So sometimes people tend to think of government as, you know, that's Olympia, but in our case, we actually really are dispersed statewide. So the Regional Markets Program that I lead specifically supports the economic viability of small and direct marketing farms, and increases the availability of Washington-grown products in schools, all different types of institutions, and on tables, or in lunch sacks, or in your backpack, or you know, in your car. However we all eat now, we would like to see some Washington food there with you. We do this in a variety of ways: technical assistance, we do some market access and market development work, we do a lot of outreach and education that includes developing resources and publications, and we do all of our work thanks to partnerships. It's really important to us that we're supporting peer-to-peer learning, and that we're working with communities at a community partnership level, and we really cannot do our work without that. So I think, you know, Washington, because we are such a diverse agricultural state, you know, we produce over 300 different crops or products, agricultural products in Washington state, and we produce really high quality products that are really known around the world. So sometimes I think people think of Washington, they think of apples. You know, they think of Washington apples exported, which is important. That's a really important part of our agricultural economy in Washington state. But actually, the vast majority of farms by number are small. So about 89% of the farms in Washington state are actually small farms. And those small farms tend to be characterized by being very diverse in their agricultural production, and that they often tend to focus on direct marketing business models. So, while our large wholesale, growers may focus on 1 to 5 different varieties of a particular crop, a diversified small farm might grow up to 75 fruit or vegetable varieties, plus may do some amount of small scale livestock or poultry production. And now more and more producers are also working in rotations of grains. So really diversified crop production means really a need for a really diversified market. But one thing to note is that even though 89% of our farms are small, those small farms generate about 6.5% of our overall ag value as we measure it. We may miss some of that value in how measurement happens, but it's still that ratio applies generally. Another thing to note as well is that where we see demographic diversity, ethnic or racial diversity within Washington state farmers, it is by far concentrated, that diversity is concentrated within the small farm sector. So WSDA regional markets exist to help and support those producers. And we do that in a whole variety of ways I mentioned earlier, just to provide a little bit more information for you to know about what you can utilize from what we offer. I'm going to walk through some of those services. So I think we may be best known for that green book right in the middle of the screen that many people call the green book. It's our handbook for small and direct marketing farms. But we also publish, I think Mike mentioned earlier, our Bridging the Gaps programming, which is specifically to assist producers in adopting best practices for on-farm produce safety, and for those who are interested in preparing for a third-party audit called a GAP, a Good Agricultural Practices Audit. So we have a publication that helps people walk step by step through preparation for that. We have a guide for schools to help them understand what their options are for procuring local food from farmers. We have lots of online resources, including videos, which I love personally. You can find all of this easily by going to agr.wa.gov/farmfoodbiz. It will take you right to the handbook. This is an old picture of what it looks like when you get there, but you'll find the green book in its online format. And you can also find a link to where you can order copies for yourself. The book itself is free, and copies of our other resources that are available. They're free, but we do ask that you pay for postage, and there's a way that you can do that through that link. I mentioned before that I love our Farm Wisdom videos. They're a little bit out of date now. I should say they're a little dated maybe, because they were created maybe 10 plus years ago, but most of the information is still really relevant. And what I love about them is that they are filmed on actual farms in Washington with actual people involved in direct marketing. And so you may actually see some people that you recognize in some of these videos, and I just think they're great. So you can find those on our YouTube channel. I think I may have a slide about that later on. In normal times, we do a lot of in-person technical assistance trainings and events. We do tours, we do on-farm classes, farm walks, all kinds of stuff. In more recent years, the last 5+ years, we've really focused a lot of our work on regional supply chain development, market access, and marketplace visibility for local producers. And that has taken a lot of different forms. We host a semi-regular community of practice for people all over the state who are working on food hub development to come together and share questions and talk to each other. We've done in the past farmer buyer networking events, local food promotions, like local food tours. We partnered with the Farm Bureau a while ago to really focus on cut flower producers. We have actually a stellar cut flower, sort of burgeoning cut flower industry in Washington State, and they don't always get as much attention. So we wanted to bring some resources and attention to the fact that local flowers make life better. So you see a great image from that effort there. You know, and a lot of this regional supply chain development is really about relationship development. And I think that's a lot of the work that you're all involved in, or I should say we're all involved in with the Puget Sound, not the Puget Sound, excuse me, with the local food system partnership work. Mike mentioned that we do farm to school programming, and Marty and I have had the opportunity to work together really closely over the years in this area of work, including helping launch a statewide network for people engaged in farm to school to connect with each other and share resources. Other ways that WSDA Regional Markets supports farm to schools in collaboration with the state Nutrition Association, we host Taste Washington Day, or we promote it, which is a one day that schools all over the state in October choose to focus and highlight Washington products and locally procured products. We also do a lot of technical assistance for one-on-one for school nutrition directors trying to figure out how to incorporate more local and have a more robust farm to school program at their own districts. And we work with farms to think about, is selling to schools a good option for you, and how do you do that? Another important role that regional markets plays is just being a first point of contact. We are happy to have you call us or email us. Lately, we've been a little hard to get a hold of because we have been totally overwhelmed with how much work we have to do. But generally, please give us a call or email us, and we will try to get you in touch with the right person to help you, whether that's someone within WSDA. It can be sort of hard to navigate big government institutions and know who you need to talk to. So we can help you find the right person in food safety, or at the organic program if you want to learn about how to become certified organic. If you are a food business that has some interest in export, I think we tend to think of export as like the big commodity producers, but actually we have a lot of really high quality specialty value added products that are finding an international market, you know, especially some of our spirits and ciders, et cetera. So we can connect you to the international marketing program and their sort of trade assistance support for small businesses. So Mike mentioned that WSDA co-convenes the Washington State Food Policy Forum. We co-convene that with the Conservation District or Conservation Commission. And we can talk more about that, answer any questions that you have, but just want to let you know that we are also a point of contact if you want to learn more about that. The Food Policy Forum has published several recommendations reports. The first one was in 2019, and it sort of lays out issues in our local food system in Washington State and challenges, and identifies some proposed solutions with recommendations that vary in their level of specificity. In 2020, the governor's office actually came to the forum and said, hey, you guys think about food policy a lot. Now that we're facing the COVID pandemic, we know that's having impacts on our food system. Do you have recommendations that we could, you know, sort of lift to the top to help us respond, or to be aware of as we're embarking in this, you know, time of pandemic? And so the forum actually produced another report, sort of taking that 2019 set of recommendations and fine tuning them and putting them through the lens of COVID. And now the forum is beginning to work more on less around writing reports and more around kind of stakeholder engagement and diving deep into one or two of the areas of recommendation that they feel like are really ripe for maybe some different types of activity and engagement. And one of those is looking at a state level marketing and promotion brand. Another is focused on some ag land preservation and maintaining land in agricultural usage. And another is focusing on preparation for the Farm Bill reauthorization, which is going to come up next year, and being able to utilize the wide group of stakeholders that's part of the Food Policy Forum to identify what about the National Farm Bill is really important to our state. So as you all know, COVID had a lot of impacts throughout all aspects of life. And in particular, the pandemic, I think, made it possible for a lot of us to understand how our food system works, both globally and locally, in a new way. And that certainly was true for the Regional Markets Program as well. In fact, all of that list of services and resources and activities that I went through that we normally occupy ourselves, we pretty much put all of those on hold and shifted into pandemic emergency response mode. And we've been kind of operating in that mode for the last 2 years. We're still a little bit operating in that mode as we're also shifting to somewhat return to some of our normal activities. So at the launch of the launch, and when the pandemic first happened, we kind of put on the brakes for a minute, worked internally at WSDA, talked with our research partners at University of Washington, said we want to understand what's going on. We did some initial surveys ourselves with directly from WSDA, and then we partnered with University of Washington to run the WaFarm survey. And this is just some of the things that we learned. 73% of producers reported that they were impacted by market closures, disruptions, other systems disruptions in the food system. For small and direct marketing farms, those impacts were pretty immediate and pretty overnight. In March of 2020, when restaurants were closed, school food service was closed, corporate and employee cafeterias were closed, farmers markets were temporarily closed in some cases, all overnight. And so for producers who were gearing up to sell to those markets, that required some really big shifts really quickly. And we really kind of made it our focus at regional markets to try to support some of those shifts. So I think one of the things we've also learned through the years of the pandemic and all of these major disruptions, just as an example, there was an estimate that around 60% of the food that Americans eat, we consume through a food service channel. So just to give you a sense of the scope of that shift in our food systems, when restaurants closed and food service closed in 2020, imagine approximately 60% of our food system in our country needed to change pretty much overnight. So that's where we saw, there were lots of headlines around like produce getting plowed under and milk getting dumped and like all of this waste. And it didn't really, that didn't happen that much in Washington state, actually. It may not have even really happened that much nationally, but it was really dramatic. But that was a result of like all of the system needing to shift to meet consumers' needs in a new way. So, where a flour mill was used to packaging things in 50-pound flour sacks, or French fry producers are bagging things up for restaurants to, make their burgers and fries. That is not really how we all use food at home. And most of us who had been eating that food in food service settings were now buying it at grocery stores, or potentially directly from producers via CSAs, or once they got running again, farmers markets. So one of the, I think, really important things that we learned is there was a real ability at the local and hyper local scale for producers to shift and adapt, in some cases much more quickly than the larger system was able to do. And so the fact that we actually had some robust local food system operations in our own state gave us some flexibility and gave us some measure of resilience. And consumers really did shift to wanting to try to seek out food more locally and more directly and closer to home for a lot of different reasons. But the truth of the matter is that those kinds of pivots, this sort of shows how producers shifted to the market channels, how they you can see those stops in direct to restaurant and stops in farmers markets and shifts instead to direct to consumer. That might have been through, in a lot of cases, through CSAs, or the increase in sales to grocery stores and food hubs, or even on farm. And then again, like more broadly in the blue, those kind of shifts where people lost market share versus where they gained it. So the role that we played was really to try to help support those swift shifts in business adaptations that we saw local producers making to be able to serve serve customers, even in spite of these disrupted market channels and changing consumer needs. We wanted to get stuff at home. We didn't want to leave the house if we could help it. And we didn't want to go much farther than our local farmers market or grocery store. And then another important part of our work has really been connecting people in our local food system to information and to relief. And in some cases, actually advocating for relief where we saw major gaps in the support that was being offered. Just a quick example of some of the things that we did. We, like many people, we created a lot of new resources, kind of a clearinghouse on our website. And early on, when no one was really sure how to operate in a safe way, and in some cases, stores or say farmers markets were closed temporarily, but our farmers were still wanting to sell direct. They still wanted, what should I do about a U-pick? So we created a series of multilingual videos just to help people understand this was not official health policy guidance. This was just sort of some common sense ways of thinking about how to take that higher level public health guidance and think about it in the context of direct marketing sales channels for farms. Of course, as always, we do all of this work through lots of partnerships. So I mentioned that one of the other things that we were focused on was really trying to make sure there was relief where relief was needed. And some of those supply chain disruptions at the national level really ended up in this shift to a focus on local consumers wanting to find local food where they could. And we really saw a lot of impacts on our local meat producers and processors through that. When shoppers were, start to feel some insecurity around availability of food when they were not seeing meat on the shelves at the grocery store, or those prices were very high, they shifted to wanting to buy local. And that meant that a lot more producers were shifting to have their meat processed from our local meat processors. And it actually created a really concerning bottleneck with a lot of pressure on our very local meat processors. And so we were able to advocate for and working in close partnership with Washington State University to be able to offer $5 million in CARES funds as an emergency capacity grant for meat producers to expand their capacity to respond. Another piece of relief that we supported was the Department of Commerce throughout the pandemic had been able to use emergency funds to support small businesses and provide small business relief funds. But some of the money that they received was explicitly not available for agricultural producers. And we knew through the work that we were doing, and that was because there was a perception that there was already a lot of federal support coming for the ag sector through the USDA. But we actually knew through the work that we were doing that the way a lot of that USDA aid or emergency support was structured was basically inaccessible at worst or irrelevant at best for smaller scale diversified direct marketing producers. So we kind of raised our hands and we said, commerce, we have a problem. Can we do something about that? And they said, well, we're limited by these funds for our specific business relief programs, but we have these other funds. Can we ask you to run some grants using those funds? And so we did. And so we focused on 4 particular sectors of our ag economy that we knew had really been falling through the cracks in other aid, and that we knew were really important for sort of the long-term health of our agricultural producers. So we focused on shellfish growers, farmers market organizations, craft beverage producers, who of course buy our grapes, pears, grains, hops. It's a really important outlet for a lot of our producers, as well as agritourism farms. Agritourism is a key method for diversification for a lot of direct marketing farms. And the tourism industry globally was just absolutely gutted by the pandemic. And there's been some recovery, especially in the ways that benefit agritourism farms. People want to get out of the city. They want to go to the countryside where there's more air. They want to, visit a farm. So there's opportunities there, but initially that impact was really felt. And so we wanted to make grants available. I'm going to move through these next slides pretty quickly because I really want to make sure we have time for conversation. But if you want to see any of this, I'll share the deck. So just some of this should probably sound pretty familiar to those of you who have been, listening and learning about the local food system in your areas. But, the types of things that people were experiencing during COVID was, reduced number of shoppers, customers, or visitors, depending on what, their business model was. The added costs of complying with food safety, with public health and safety. People wanted to do it, but it was a cost, no doubt about it. And then, of course, cash flow issues, because there was that initial loss of planned revenues as people were shifting. So, there was opportunity, especially for local economies, but there were also added costs in accessing those opportunities. And so a lot of people use grant funds to pay for those types of expenses. This is just kind of from those grants that we offered, the relief and recovery grants, some of the kind of more unique challenges, a little more specific to each sector. A lot of them I've talked about already. And then, you'll see a lot of commonalities here in how people were using those funds. Paying operating expenses, paying expenses that didn't go away regardless of whether or not, kind of overhead rent. A lot of people wanting to keep their employees on staff, even though they may not have been operating in the same ways. And of course, just making business adaptations. So I think you're probably picking this up through what I'm saying already, but WSDA is focused on food. And in fact, our director Derek Sandison, in 2019 actually had launched his own specific initiative called Focus on Food, specifically to kind of elevate this. We would sometimes hear, as in our conversations out and about around the state, that people thought, well, you're only about those really big commodity export producers. And certainly that is an important part of what WSDA is tasked with doing as an agency, but we do so much more. And really, our work is about food that is grown, produced, and processed in our state, brings our communities together, urban and rural, diverse communities, and really does sustain us nutritionally as well as economically. So Focus on Food is really about bringing a highlight to the fact that agriculture is integral to Washington State, to our identity, and to our economic health, and that we work with farms of all different scales and sizes and types. And this beautiful poster that you see here is something that we had created and we're just picking up from the printers. We were going to deliver one to all of the legislators as sort of a welcome to session gift. It's something that departments sometimes do. And we went into shutdown like 2 weeks later. So, more specifically, we have some particular objectives and goals within that focus on director's initiative of focusing on food, and it is to ensure a safe and nutritious supply of food and to support a healthy and thriving Washington population. And in particular, I want to draw attention to goal number 1, which is to increase the economic viability of farmers and food businesses with resources prioritized for historically underrepresented farmers and ranchers, including women, minority, and small business owners. So that's kind of our lodestar for the work that we're doing going into the future. And thankfully, the legislature also recognized the value of that work. And the 2021, so we just ended a session, but that was a short, they call it a short session. It was usually the time the legislature comes together to like clean up mistakes or clean up make administrative adjustments. But the last full session in 2021, the legislature made really remarkable investments in our food system. They reinforced the WSDA's focus on food, but they also really reinforce this, this approach that the Food Policy Forum has been articulating, which is to have comprehensive investments, both in emergency relief coming out of the pandemic and in future resiliency. And the Food Policy Forum has been really consistent in articulating that the greatest and most effective progress in food systems change and improvement will come with moving, advancing change or implementing recommendations across these 5 areas that the forum has identified as key areas to focus on for food system development, and to advance change in all of those in tandem, because it is a system and everything is connected. So I flipped through that slide. It was a lot of basically the message to take away from that previous slide with all the bubbles was a lot of money got invested in new programs and in relief, and they support these goals here. So what does that mean practically? So from the regional markets perspective, there are new opportunities for local food connections. There are new sales opportunities for producers, and there are new opportunities for resources for local food system efforts. And I'm going to walk through some of those quickly in a little bit more detail. There's a really strong new focus both in our state and nationally from USDA on public purchasing and public purchasing from local producers, and where possible from historically underrepresented producers as well. I'm going to talk specifically about farm to school grants because that's in our book of work, but some of you may also be familiar with the We Feed Washington, which is a pilot food insecurity food box program that's sourcing from local producers. Our WSDA Food Assistance Program within their regular work has the Farm to Food Bank program, as well as trying to focus more on local procurement. And then the USDA has just recently issued requests for proposals from state agencies for 2 cooperative agreements, the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program and the Local Food for Schools program, that are basically giving additional funding to states to do locally oriented procurement, food procurement. We have a Profiting from Your Pivot program, local meat, lots of great stuff happening with local meat, and local supply chain and infrastructure investments. So let me talk about each of those. The legislature invested $5 million in our Farm to School program, and in particular to be able to offer purchasing grants. This is a long time in coming. A lot of people have put a lot of work over many years to see this realized, and it's really wonderful because we know that Farm to School is a wonderful thing. It's not as simple to make happen as you might think. And one of the barriers is just that districts often don't have enough sort of flexible funding to be able to purchase the food that they want from local producers. And so being able to offer districts, and in this case, we're actually offering for childcare as well, funds specifically earmarked for purchasing Washington grown products is really, really important. So we have actually already awarded one round of grants. 52 grantees received funds. Those grantees can apply for funds again for the coming year. As far as we know, this funding is ongoing in the state budget. So this will be an ongoing program. We're going to watch the budget really closely because they're shifting the fund source, the original fund source. And so that always makes us a little nervous to make sure it's really going to stay in there in the state budget. But it's written in now as ongoing, and we're planning that it's an ongoing program. This sort of breaks down how that first round of awards was distributed. 13 childcare, so preschools or other childcare programs, 38 districts, and 1 summer meal program. And we are just about to open the applications for the next round for the coming school year. So, if districts in your area are not yet participating, let them know about this opportunity. And please encourage them to apply, because as you can see, we still have a significant amount of money to award in this coming year. The legislature also funded WSDA to create a new program within regional markets to provide support and assistance to small and mid-sized meat processors and direct marketing farmers and ranchers. So Alyssa Umars, who's based out in Central Washington in the Methow Valley, is on staff and doing excellent work to provide technical assistance. There's going to be some more offerings coming soon. So watch the WA Meetup website for information about that. WA Meetup is the collaborative umbrella between WSDA and WSU, where we're trying to bring together a community of people who are interested in local meat in Washington state. That funding, that approximately $4 million in funding, also included 3.6 specifically for grants. We just finished awarding grants to meat processors. Those grants went to processors in 28 counties. About half of them were allocated to small projects, and about half was allocated to large projects. And you can see the full list of awardees on that link below. We're also partnering with Business Impact Northwest using a specialty crop block grant that we applied for to offer one-on-one business assistance and some paid professional services to individual farm and food and value-added food businesses, specifically to help with all those pivots that we talked about. People made big business shifts during the pandemic, but now we're looking ahead to what's next. And that's a hard sort of business planning to do for a direct marketing farm. It's hard for anybody, but direct marketing farms as well. And so we wanted to just provide a little bit of additional business support. So this program provides one-on-one business coaching, access to all of the business support that Business Impact Northwest already provides, opportunity to learn from other farmers who are contracted as farmer mentors to the participants, and actually the ability to receive up to around $700 in paid professional marketing, accounting, and or reimbursement for a successful gap audit. So for producers who are looking at moving into more of a wholesale model, having a gap audit is really important, but the cost of that audit can be a challenge, a barrier. And so this is one way for us to help lessen that. So there's going to be one under the grant that we currently have. There will be one more cohort. Application for that will open this fall. We also received funding to take a closer look at barriers, challenges, and opportunities that face historically underrepresented farmers and ranchers in our state. As I mentioned before, at the opening, like where we do see racial, ethnic, and demographic diversity generally within Washington state farmers is within the small farm sector. But there's not as much diversity as we see in the general population of our state. And so clearly we have both historic and present barriers and challenges that make it difficult for anyone who wants to participate in our ag economy, in our ag world. So the legislature funded us to take a closer look at that and actually do a bit of an assessment and write a report to the legislature about some of those barriers, opportunities, and make recommendations for how WSDA can improve our own services to better serve producers of color, women, transgender, everybody, how we can better serve producers with our services. So I'm really excited that we're just going to be bringing on the person who will be leading that work in a couple weeks, and that is really exciting. And finally, this is my last real slide before I open it up for discussion. We also received a total $17 million in funding to make grants for improvements to local food system infrastructure, supply chains, and market access. 8 million, or I maybe actually flip this, but approximately half of the funds allocated are specifically prioritized for women, minority, and small business owners. And so we are working now to really design the specifics of that grant. We were asked to do a lot by the legislature in a really short amount of time. And we are overjoyed and just extremely grateful to the legislature for investing in our work and in the collective work and the importance of our local food system. But it's taken us, we've been doing a lot to launch 4 brand new large grant programs in less than a year. This is the one that we're just getting ready to launch, and we are still seeking input from stakeholders around what is important for us to know and be thinking about and consider as we formulate the guidelines and the structure for this grant. And so that's what I would love to open up now for broader discussion and hear from all of you a little bit more about really what you see as needs in your community or your own personal farm or business, and what you think these grants could really be most impactful at supporting. And then kind of along those lines, what types of technical assistance or support do you think you or others in your community would really need to either apply for the grant, but almost more importantly, to be successful with funds that you may receive? Is that food safety assistance? Is it operational information about processing plants? Is it, I'm just, I really want to hear from you, but just to kind of prime the pump. I'm going to leave this slide up and just open it to discussion. And as I do so, I also want to introduce my team member who is on the call as well. Galen Van Horn has recently joined our team, and he will be the person going forward in the future that will be managing this grant and that you'll all be communicating with even more as we move ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Laura.
Laura, I just also want to say that we have a few people who have questions in addition to addressing the ones that you have put up here. And I'd like to invite folks to just, you can use the raise hands and we'll see you. And I can also, if you want me to ask your question for you, just send me a little chat. Thank you.
Nobody wants to speak first.
Why don't
I wrote down
questions, if that's helpful. I can read them.
Please do, because I can't see the chat, and I know Marty's tracking that for me, but I think
Yeah, Emily
Yeah,
and
if
I
we-
are both on it, and so go for it, Emily. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, the first question was from Sam Payne, and I'll take some notes because it sounds like Sam's audio's not working great, so I can pop the answer into the chat for them. The question is, you may know military families face a real issue with food security. How can WSDA help us do a better job of delivery of food to these folks? As a veteran, this is a big issue, and DoD has identified this as an issue.
Mhm. That is a great question. I'm not sure if that is a question around just engaging veterans more thoroughly kind of in local food systems, or if it's more of a question specifically around food insecurity and food access programs and integrating veterans more in provision of those services. I think I will be the first to say that WSDA is engaging in new ways of addressing or food insecurity beyond our traditional food access programs, which, you know, TFAP and the work there with food banks. So the We Feed Washington pilot is one example of that. We're hearing from and thinking about new approaches to include in our proposal to the USDA for those local food purchasing funds. And I am not an expert on food assistance programs, so I don't have specific responses related to our, you know, those programs. But I will say, I think that's a great question for the community. As we're looking at development of local food infrastructure and local food systems, I think that's an incredibly important question to consider.
The next question I have written down is from Yolimar, and it is, how do you measure viability?
Hi, Jolimar. I can't see your face, but I'm glad you put in that question. I mean, for us, we think of it really in terms of ability to continue. So I think that's a really vague response, but it's vague because we work with producers who have a lot of different goals themselves. So, you know, regional markets is really focused on farms that are engaging in some type of economic activity and some commerce. So there's a lot of small farms in Washington State that are much more oriented towards sort of more homestead and self-sufficiency. And that, you know, there's measures for viability there, but we're not as focused on that. We really are focused on farms that are trying to have some sort of business viability. So I don't think that that needs to be necessarily a for-profit business. There are lots of nonprofit businesses, but I think viability is about, you know, the ability to be economically sustainable year after year, you know, while supporting the ways in which that farm wants to work. So that might include, you know, the way they market, who their produce, or not just produce, who their products are available to, or you know, what type of agricultural practices they're using. So you want to make sure that like a viable farm is able to continue to operate in a way that supports those objectives.
Thanks, Laura.
Hi, I'll share a question that came in that says, I run a commercial kitchen in Buckley designed to help local farms to process farm products so they can sell value-added products during the season. What kind of grants are available for them to use an infrastructure built and being built as a private small business owner like me?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a great, I would love to hear more about what you need, because that is really those types of businesses and that type of infrastructure is really what the these new infrastructure grants are intended to support. So I want to draw everybody's attention to that survey link that's on the slide. It's open, and I'm sure that you all have more thoughts and ideas than we'll have time to talk about now. So I would please use that link to share your thoughts with us. So I'm assuming maybe because that was a typed in question, you may not be able to unmute yourself and talk right now, but please do if you can. And if not, follow that link and share more info with us.
And I'll just note that I've included a link in the chat if you just want to click through.
Thanks, Galen. I would say also another grant that there are not very many grants that are available directly for individual businesses for investing in food system infrastructure. So that's one of the reasons that we are really overjoyed to have this opportunity to make these investments, even if it is one time. So I'll mention that with the exception of the Farm to School grant that I highlighted, all of that funding and all those programs that I walked through were funded on a one-time basis for this biennium. So they'll all be ending in about a year unless there's new funding for them included in the next legislative session's budget. So that's just something for people to be aware of, that I think there's a lot of legislators who are really interested in learning more and doing a lot more to support local farmers and local food systems. But I think they would likely welcome hearing your perspectives and your views on these issues and programs. But I did want to say, in addition to this grant, one other one that's out there, which is from the USDA, is the Value Added Producer Grant. That is for farmers who are doing value added processing, which could, or creating value added products, which could be about marketing. It could be like packaging and market access that adds value. That's really the only other one that I'm aware of that's directly available. That has a pretty robust application. And so it's open now, it's closing soon, but I would say if you're not already in the process of applying for that one, take a look at the application and plan for it for a year or two out, because it's valuable, but it's big.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to, hi, my mic didn't work, so I have to just fiddle with it. I looked into all the grants so far. The kind of model I'm trying to help in the local community as a small business, because I'm not the one who's running the farm. So it's not available. All the questions are relating to a farmer. The problem with a farmer-centric approach is that if a farmer retires and if he's gone, the infrastructure is gone with them. So no other farmers can utilize. The nature of farmers, coming and going, and seasons that's going on and off. If there is one facility where they all can come and use, just like how the tractor sharing use kind of thing like that, that would be the kind of approach which would help them. Any farmers based on the season, they can come and use the space, rent them up and make everything and, go and sell it, or even make food to the schools or anything like that. The way how I'm building is to build a large coolers and freezer space so that everybody can share and use it. So that's my goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, there's a huge need and actually a huge gap in Washington State in that type of shared facility, whether it's just facilities that producers can come and use themselves and rent, or actual sort of co-packing. And so, yeah, but this grant we have not published the guidelines. We are still, soliciting input and creating those, but the hope is that this grant would be available for just that type of thing.
Okay.
I'm afraid we're at 1 o'clock and we have so many great questions in the chat. And so I just want to reassure everybody that we will share those questions with Laura, and you also have, and Galen, and you also have this survey instrument where you can put some of those, ask some of those questions, or share some of your ideas. And I think I just need to invite Mike to send us off here. Thank you all for being here. Mike, would you like to
Yeah,
close
if
us out?
only briefly, Laura, Galen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank everyone that took the opportunity to join us today. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I'm sorry I couldn't treat you a sandwich. As Marty stated, please get those questions. We have them in the chat, or you can reach out to Marty directly, and we'll make sure that we, in turn, get those to Laura and Galen. And just one more, big thank you for the online version of that Green Book. For individual producers and service providers on the call as well, do not underestimate the value of that piece of work, a really great piece. So thank you all once again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.